Stormy Daniels, this is the week in the Trump trial. We finally heard from Stormy Daniels. Trump posted, "The whole world is watching." Oh. I hate to tell you, Don, not even your family is watching. And now, of course, the looming question is, will Trump take the stand? And we know for sure he will not, because he said he would. That's how we know for sure he will not. But come on, Trump take the stand, he'd put his hand on the Bible, it'd be sizzled like a fajita. But now Trump's team is pushing for a mistrial. Oh, and by the way, mistrial is also Trump's drag name. She's talking about...
And I'll be playing much more from last night's edition of Real Time with Bill Maher. Many of you have been enjoying my responses to the show, so we'll do it again this week. And the most interesting part to me is later on in the show, a discussion between a New York Times contributor, a New York Post contributor, and Bill Maher about the Biden v. Trump rematch and the media coverage of it. So a lot to address on that front. Before getting to that, sticking on just Bill Maher for a second, he also addressed Stormy Daniels' testimony directly, not just the good jokes about Trump there. And his analysis of Stormy Daniels' testimony bothered me because it plays into what I've heard in narrative form across some of the media that just doesn't seem to be it exactly, not exactly on the nose. And while you're watching this, please make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel just by clicking the subscribe button.
He was bigger and blocking the way. It's all the Me Too buzzwords. She said there was a power imbalance of power, for sure. My hands were shaking so hard. She said she blacked out. Blacked out? She's a porn star. I don't think
that doesn't mean she's been subjected to the likes of Donald Trump.
Yeah, so obviously I don't love the suggestion that being a porn star means you can't get super uncomfortable in a sexual encounter, but also he's alluding to this idea that I heard mostly in right-wing media, but some across the media, about Stormy Daniels adding things to her testimony that she hasn't said before. So clearly she's sort of making it sound more severe than it was. And there's no way that she felt uncomfortable in that moment if that wasn't the core of her story previously, which, first of all, she has alluded to in the past, the way that she was uncomfortable, but that has led her to specify very clearly that she's not alleging a sexual assault. She's not alleging Trump forced himself on Stormy Daniels. And she's just detailing, as she's obligated to tell the whole truth now on the stand, that she felt super uncomfortable. So much so that a sort of blackout event apparently happened for her. And while she was having those feelings, she didn't like that she was in that situation. She didn't express that to Trump. And so she's not alleging wrongdoing on the part of Trump when it comes to that. And also when people criticize her as a witness and saying, oh my gosh, this is their star witness and she's so bad. She's not really a witness to the potential crimes. She's just telling the jury, here's the information that they were trying to prevent from getting out to the public. Then other witnesses and other evidence will have to confirm if the process of trying to cover up that story ended up crossing over into criminality because of the falsification of business records in an effort to cover up the campaign finance violations. That has to be proven by other people and other evidence. She's just saying, let me tell you the story that would have come out, and you can judge as the jury if you think this is something that maybe these crimes were committed in an effort to cover up because of how it could have lost Trump the election. So I think she was absolutely fine in serving the role as a witness that she was there to serve. But moving on from that, here is them starting to get into the discussion of this beef between the New York Times and President Joe Biden. And Biden's campaign is saying the New York Times isn't doing a good enough job of advocating on behalf of democracy. And the New York Times is saying, oh, they're just saying that we don't do enough positive coverage of Biden and we're not going to become just cheerleaders for the president. So I'll play this for you, then respond.
Yeah. But now here's Mr. Khan, what he said. He said, there are people who want to elect Donald Trump as president. It is not the job of the news media to prevent that from happening. It's the job of Biden and the people around him. So I applaud this.
Politics. Don't be in journalism and the media.
But here's the thing we can't do. We need to be honest about them both. We need not to ignore and sugarcoat Biden's shortcomings. But we also can't do this. Here's one bad story about Trump. Here's one bad story about Biden. We can't enforce this mathematical equivalence, right? You've got one candidate who has delusions or aspirations to a quasi-fascist state. You've got another who's going to mix up the name of world leaders and need a midday nap. It's not eeny, meeny, miny.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and then the New York Post contributor will say something I disagree with, but I'll address that in a second. So Bill Maher was sort of agreeing with the New York Times criticism of Biden. And of course, I don't doubt Biden's campaign is a political campaign, so I don't doubt that they would love if New York Times would just constantly do 24/7 puff pieces about Biden. But that's not really what the criticism of the New York Times is. From my understanding, it's sort of a criticism a lot of us have been levying the way of the mainstream media for some time now, which is that there doesn't seem to be proper coverage being done of this election, as shown by the fact that a lot of people don't seem to get some of the fundamental facts of this election. Fundamental elements of Trump's record. Like, shouldn't people be informed on that? Even if you're not being a partisan outlet, just informing people on one of the two major candidates and his record in trying to block the peaceful transfer of power. That's a pretty notable thing in a democratic election, to know that one of the candidates tried to do that and what he's being prosecuted for on that front. And in polling and also in my interpersonal conversations with people, a lot of people just don't really know about that. They haven't heard about the details and why people are saying Trump is such a threat to democracy, just based on his own actions that you can document in a very objective way as the New York Times, and also what he's been saying about his intentions for a second term. And if the pulse out in the country isn't matching in a knowledge sense that fact, then isn't someone messing up and informing them? Someone has to inform them. And then also, while you absolutely should do, when there are stories to do this with, negative coverage, again, when it's justified, of President Joe Biden, even if he is the one pro-democracy candidate, you also have an obligation as media outlets to do coverage that is proportional to the importance of issues. So sometimes, and a great point brought up by that New York Times contributor, it seems like they're going, well, we've done 5 negative stories about Trump, so let's throw in a Biden shoe story or a Biden age story. And it seems to be an artificial leveling of the scale. And that's not the job of media outlets. Just do accurate coverage. If that means a bunch of stories would be perceived as negative about Trump, well, given the facts of this election, that makes a lot of sense. And I will add to the criticism that no, you're not supposed to do 24/7 puff pieces about the sitting president, obviously. Also, reporting came out that because of this beef and the head of the New York Times being really upset that Biden wanted to do an interview with the New York Times, there does seem to be an overplaying intentionally. I think it was a Political report that revealed this, of Biden's age, which, as I've said before, is an issue. It's a subject, but the amount of coverage that's given to it would make one believe this is the issue of the election, the most important issue. And as I've said before, what impacts people's lives the most? Well, the policies that impact millions of people's jobs and millions of people's healthcare and millions of people's infrastructure. So why aren't the policies ever discussed? Because again, as you look at polling and talk to people, most people have no idea about the policy record of President Joe Biden. Even if you dislike it, people just don't know the list of things. I think a lot of people would like it if they knew, but people don't know regardless. And so something's wrong there. And that, I think, is a justified criticism coming from the Biden campaign. Here's more.
It could easily be done by a Trump supporter the other way around, as you know. And the problem in this country now, as I see it...
What's the other way?
Look, if 50% of the population vote one way, 50% vote another, and occasionally you get this sort of small percentage who swing.
Yeah, that is a misunderstanding of the current political moment, but...
Frank's side on this for a minute, by quoting Mr. Tim Scott. He was running for president on the Republican side. He didn't make it. Now was asked last week, would he accept the 2024 election results? He goes around a little bit and then he says, at the end of the day, the 47th president of the United States will be President Donald Trump. That sounds a lot like no. I will not accept any results except unless our side wins, it's a fake election. So I think that is a very fundamental difference.
You cannot. No, but in all honesty, you cannot compare saying Russia meddled, which, by the way, Russia did, with January 6th. You can't compare it.
No, but you can see it.
Compare it with the grievance bomb, which was created. Donald Trump launched a scheme, fake electors, etc., to steal the election.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's so hard to understand, and I get that. And so avid political viewers might be thinking, oh my gosh, how many times do we have to say that Trump did this or that? We get it. Let's go on to other things. I actually saw someone in my comments recently say, can we move on to other things? And the point is, no, that if you're a political geek like me, and you find yourself consuming content constantly, reading content constantly, having discussions with people constantly about politics, some of this seems like everyone knows that, but that's not the vast majority of the American public. And that's perfectly fine. People are out there occupied doing many other things, raising families, working jobs, etc. But given the existential nature of this election, hopefully we can reach more people and inform them on this, because I've now been in a bunch of spaces that normally, for the sake of social cohesion, I would avoid bringing up politics, but lately have just been asking a lot of questions about politics to people. And in so many places, he brought up the fake elector scheme, no awareness of the fake elector scheme, a scheme that if it had worked, quite literally would have just stopped democracy in America. If the fake elector scheme had worked, Trump would have stayed president, but he lost the election. That's not how democracy works. He would have just appointed himself a dictator of sorts. And luckily, people like Mike Pence opposed it. And even if Mike Pence didn't oppose it, the constitutional fallout of that, who knows where it would have led, but it would have been a disaster. And almost every single American should know intimately about that scheme, given how consequential it was. But almost nobody does. Everyone in the super avid political consumer space does, but not the vast majority of Americans. And so then, and I was saying this in a past segment, you can't really blame people, but you can't really blame people and be upset at people for not understanding why it's a no-brainer to go vote for Joe Biden when they don't yet have the facts for that to be such a no-brainer decision. And so we just need to be discussing that constantly, which is why I discuss it constantly on the show. And so the New York Post contributor, we didn't hear much from him in those clips, but I watched the full thing and he kept jumping in, saying things to the effect of, you heard the tail of it there. Oh, well, the left is saying that Trump threatens democracy. The right could just say that Biden threatens democracy. They think that the left denied election results. And I won't go through the whole debunking of that idea here because I've done it so many times in the past. But the simple answer is, yeah, but there is an actual fact-based reality based on actual actions, as was brought up by the New York Times contributor, that Trump took that aren't speculative, that aren't rhetoric. These are very concrete steps that were taken that fundamentally threaten democracy. And then very clear promises that are being made that, again, threaten democracy. And it's just not comparative at all. And to give you an example of when people say Biden threatens democracy too, RFK Jr., we've debunked this before, but one of the things he said was Biden threatens democracy because he's taking away my Secret Service protection and denying me Secret Service protection during this presidential campaign because he wants me to get hurt because I'm his political opponent. And in reality, the sort of qualifications to get Secret Service protection in a campaign, it would be unheard of for RFK Jr., given his size as a candidate and the earliness of the campaign, for him to get Secret Service protection right now, regardless of who he was. And so it just wasn't accurate. That's not how it works, regardless of if Biden was the president or not. And so it was dishonest. Same thing with censorship allegations against Biden. And so there are facts, and if the facts do clearly portray one candidate being this existential threat to democracy, then that should be accurately reported on. Don't do just 24/7 cheerleading of the other side or blind negative coverage of the threat. Do accurate coverage and do it in a way that's proportional to the importance of the issues. And I'm not just saying that when it comes to the democracy issue, which should get tons of coverage because of how important it is under that framework, but also the huge policies, again, whether you like them or not, I tend to like them, but the huge historic policies that Biden has implemented, shouldn't people know what he's actually been doing. Yes, okay, he wears aviators and he's sort of old. That has been covered. Can we talk about the infrastructure law a little bit? Because that's what matters in people's lives. Millions of jobs being created, that's what actually impacts people's lives. And I think this election would be an easier decision for a lot of people if they were just accurately informed on the facts, rather than this desperate need to come off as unbiased. And in so doing, you bend over backwards in a way that makes you biased, just in the complete wrong direction. I'll leave it there. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments.